Hi, spoken word. Happy Friday. Today we're going to be discussing Pinheiro, well, the Nuyorican poet, but specifically Miguel Pinheiro. Which is what you read. So let's get started. Um, so Pinheiro was if you watched the trailer for the movie, you probably got the sense that Pinheiro was a very colorful slash eccentric, um, and maybe some would say troubled person. Um, he is, however, an important figure in the Nuyorican movement. Um, if you're wondering what Nuyorican means, it's a cross between Puerto Rican and New Yorker, so New Nuyorican. And this term was created by, I'm not sure of the exact person, but Puerto Rican immigrants in New York in the 70s. And it was a term to, I guess, indicate an elevated consciousness. There was actually a political movement that went with this group, the Young Lords. They were comparable to the Black Panthers. Well, I shouldn't say comparable because the Black Panthers did a lot more, and their reach was a lot greater. And of course, they were more forcefully opposed by the government than the Young Lords. But the Young Lords were sort of striving in the same direction as the Black Panthers. So anyway, that's what the Nuyorican term means, and Pinheiro was a very important figure in it. So yes, as I said, he had a very colorful life. He was very eccentric, or if you want to say troubled, or maybe both. He was a heroin addict. He did serve time in prison. He was a petty criminal. He was also a TV show writer and actor. He wrote episodes for Miami Vice, which I've never even seen it. So that was before your time and mine, but it was a big show that he was a part of. He was also a playwright, and he had a tremendous amount of success with his play Short Eyes, which he actually started writing in prison. It ended up at Lincoln Center. It was very critically acclaimed, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So Pinheiro was a complicated guy. He was very loved despite his criminal status and his drug use. He was loved and adored by his community. If we watch the Pinheiro movie, the biopic that Benjamin Bratt stars in, you will see there's a scene where he goes into a bodega and he gives the owners $5,000 because they need money. So he just gives them $5,000. So yeah, despite some of the things he did, he was still very beloved by people who knew him and even people who didn't. He was very close friends with poet Miguel Algarin, and the two of them, they founded the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. But their friendship is really interesting, I think, because Algarin was he was a professor at Rutgers for like 20 years. And so he was the more together of the two. And the reason they actually opened the cafe back in the 70s was because Pinheiro and some of the other poets would come to Algarin's apartment at all hours of the day and night to read their new works. And it got to be a problem. So Miguel Algarin said, let's open a place where we can do this. And so that's how that happened. Pinheiro wrote a play. The play I told you that he started writing in prison. It was called Short Eyes, and it's set over in the course of one day in a prison where there's a white, and none of the inmates are white. And there's a white man that gets arrested, and he's accused of child molestation. So the prisoners, the other inmates, they judge him, and we know that he's really guilty, but the other inmates, they don't know that, and they take it upon themselves to exact justice, and they kill him. And there's only one other person besides the audience that knows that. Well, yeah, there's only one other person besides the audience that knows that this man really did molest children, and that's Juan. And after he is killed, Juan tells everybody, it's basically a play about not judging others. And again, it was very critically acclaimed. It won the New York Drama Critics Award in 1974, and it also won an Obie Award. So those are two very prestigious awards. And it brought Pinheiro fame and money, and then of course Miami Vice and the work he did for TV brought him even more money. So he had a considerable amount of success. In everything I've seen and heard about him, he just sounds very charismatic and very personable. However, he also drank excessively and he died at the young age of 41 from cirrhosis of the liver, which is really sad, I think. But I wanted to tell you two stories about him. One is about how the movie that was made about him, how it came to be made, and the other is about his death. So after Short Eyes had the success that it did, Pinheiro, especially in New York, Pinheiro was sort of like the hot topic among writers and artists. And this filmmaker named Leon, I think it's pronounced Icasso, was in Central Park, and he had heard all these stories about Pinheiro. Like every time he went to a party or every time he went out to dinner, someone had something to say about Pinheiro because Pinheiro was sort of the hot topic or the hot writer of the moment. And Icasso was really curious about him. He wanted to meet him, so he's in Central Park and rolling a joint, and this guy, or no, I'm sorry, not rolling a joint. He's just in Central Park, okay? And this guy comes out of the bushes. If you've ever been to Central Park, you can imagine this happening because it's so big and so vast. But anyway, this guy crawls out of the bushes and he's wearing sky blue bell bottoms and he's smoking a joint. He's rolling the joint. And he turns to Icasso and he's like, "Hey, you want to hit?" And so that was how they met. And after that happened, Icasso was like, "Oh, I have to make a film about this guy." So that became the film Pinheiro, which if we were meeting in person, I would have us watch, not the whole thing, but parts of it. I would say about 30 minutes of it. It's really good. It's an interesting film. But anyway, so I just thought that's an interesting story. And then something else that's really beautiful is that before Pinheiro died, he was in a bar drinking and he collapsed on the floor, which isn't really beautiful, and he was brought to the hospital. And he was supposed to be going out on a poetry tour of the Southwest with Miguel Algarin and some other poets. However, he couldn't because he was in the hospital, and they noticed that he wasn't around. So ultimately, Miguel Algarin found him in the hospital and went to go see him. And Pinheiro said, "No, go do the tour. I'll be here when you get back." But before this happened, Pinheiro went to Algarin and said, "Let's write poems about what we want done in the event that either of us die." So Pinheiro died while the rest of the poets were away. But Algarin had this poem that Pinheiro had written about what he wanted done with his ashes. And that's now known as a Lower East Side poem. And it's really beautiful. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but just some of it. Wait, let me find. This is just some of it. "Just once before I die, I want to climb on a tenement sky, to dream my lungs out till I cry, then scatter my ashes through the Lower East Side. There's no place for me to be, no other place that I can see. There's no other town that brings you up or keeps you down. No food, little heat sweeps by, fancy cars and pimps bars and juke saloons and greasy spoons make my spirits fly with wishes scattered through, with my ashes scattered through the Lower East Side. A thief, a junkie I've been, committed every known sin. Jews and Gentiles, bums and men of style, runaway child, police shooting wild, mothers, futile wails, pushers making sales, dope wheelers and cocaine dealers, smoking pot. Streets are hot and feed off the blood of those who bleed to death. I don't want to be buried in Puerto Rico. I don't want to rest in a Long Island cemetery. I want to be near the stabbing, shooting, gambling, fighting, unnatural dying, and new birth crying. So please, when I die, don't take me far away. Keep me nearby. Take my ashes and scatter them through the Lower East Side." So they actually had a ceremony outside of the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, which is in Lower Manhattan or Alphabet City. Sometimes it's referred to as Loisada. They had this ceremony, and all the poets in New York came, like Amiri Baraka, who we talked about last week, was there, and Pietro Pietri, um, a lot of other people whose name, well, anyway. So they gathered in the vacant lot next to the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, and they took turns reading this poem. And then they had like a can with Pinero's ashes, and they actually walked through the Lower East Side, scattering them. Um, and as they were doing this, people, in the neighborhood stopped and would ask them, like, "Hey, what do you do? What's going on?" And literally everyone who found out, who asked that question and learned, oh, they're scattering Mikey's ashes, joined in the procession. So it was a huge group of people that actually did this. And what I think really shows that he was loved by everyone who knew him, his neighbors and his peers, is just the fact of how many people participated in this ceremony and how everyone in the neighborhood joined in. Now, the Lower East Side, if you ever go to the Nuyorican, or just in case you were wondering, the Lower East Side is a very different place today than it was in the 70s. In the 90s, when I was in high school, it was still considered a bad area. But of course, like everything else, it's been gentrified now, which just means that rich people and developers moved in and, knocked down some of the more humble buildings and put up big new condos, and the rent skyrockets. So, so it's kind of a different place now than it once was. But I just thought I would share those two stories with you. I think they give you a sense of who Pinheiro was. But moving on to his poems. So the one that I'm going to discuss with you now, oh gosh, we're already at 11 minutes, is the Book of Genesis. So according to St. Miguelito. So obviously that is a parallel of the 7 days when God created the universe, which is told in the Bible book of Genesis. So, but Pinheiro is describing a parallel universe that is very different from the one that you and I know. He's discussing the inner city, and this is actually a very radical poem where he makes the accusation that the inner cities, or the ghettos, if you want to use that word, were created by man, and that there are a number of systems and systemic practices behind the creation of the ghetto and the things that happen there, and that ultimately it's genocide. And genocide is, this is the definition, the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group. So in this poem, Pinheiro is actually accusing, you can't tell if is he accusing mainstream society? Is he accusing capitalist society? Is he accusing white? He's not specific enough, but man has created the ghettos. And is he talking about all of them? I think he's talking more specifically about the Bronx, where he was initially from. Well, actually, he was born in Puerto Rico, but about the Bronx and the Lower East Side. And it's very radical what he's saying, and it's a great poem on top of that. So it starts out, before the beginning, God created God, which man. And then in the beginning, God, man, created the ghettos and the slums. And so why does he say that man created the ghettos and the slums? Just in case you're reading this and your reaction is, well, man didn't create the ghettos. The people who live there create them by, fucking messing things up. Actually, there are a lot of anthropologists and sociologists and people who are in urban studies who would point to, and this, I'm just going to give you one example, Robert Moses, who was a developer and urban planner. And he is the person who actually is responsible for the Cross Bronx Expressway. So the Cross Bronx Expressway, if you're not familiar with the Bronx, I'm not really too familiar with it either. But the point is that it's a major, I think it's like a 7-lane highway. And it goes through the Bronx. Now, when Moses decided to build it, he didn't just decide to build it on an idle strip of land. His plan was to bulldoze and demolish a whole neighborhood in the Bronx. He did not care that it was a low-income neighborhood, of course, but he displaced over 1,500 families. So over 1,500 families is way more people than that in the construction of the Cross Bronx Expressway. And not only did it displace all those people and demolish a lot of houses, but then it also created sort of a permanent wall or divide between the more affluent neighborhoods to the north and then the Bronx. So many people who study this, they actually argue that that is a deliberate, not just that facilitates white flight, because of course those who can move are going to, and that's what most people did. They moved to the suburbs, and then the expressway creates like a barrier so that the people who are in the Bronx are separated from the people in the suburbs. So it literally leads to like two different worlds, and it reinforces that. And a lot of, as I was saying, people who study this say that the turmoil in the Bronx of the 70s and 80s, and even today, the Bronx is not the greatest place. There is a lot of crime there, but the turmoil of the 70s and 80s was a direct result of the construction of this highway. So, let's see. So that would be if you say, well, why do people say that the ghettos and the slums are deliberate or created? This would be something that urban studies people point, or scholars, I'm sorry, point to as evidence, because Moses knew what he was doing. It was a low income neighborhood, and many people believe that he did this to separate or isolate the low income from the wealthier areas. So, and that's just one example. Okay, so back to the book of Genesis, according to Saint Miguelito. Pinheiro accuses man of deliberately creating the ghettos and then deliberately introducing elements that just continue to make quality of life and conditions even worse. He specifically mentions lead-based paint. He talks about disease. He talks about degradation. Just one other real-life example, at Lincoln Hospital, which is in the Bronx, in the 70s, it was actually discovered that many women who went to the hospital, Puerto Rican women who went to the hospital, would be talked into getting sterilized. That means so they could no longer have kids. And that actually became a political issue for the young lords. And that was something that many of the members pointed to as evidence of attempted genocide. Like, look, you're trying to kill us, you're sterilizing our women. So I don't think Pinheiro's too far off. Maybe some of what he's saying, like God introduced heroin and cocaine. But then if you think of, and by God he means man, but if you think about it, you can't really buy heroin and cocaine in Scarsdale, which that's a very wealthy suburb in Westchester. I think Beyonce and Jay-Z have a mansion there. I had a boyfriend in college whose mother lived there. It's really rich and it's very close to the Bronx. So yeah, those are two places very close together, but you can get heroin and cocaine in one and you can't in the other. So Pinheiro is pointing to the people who bring that in. And well, I'll read it, and then he points to capitalism. So he's calling out all these systems that worsen the quality of life for people in the ghetto. I'll start reading. God was riding around Harlem in a gypsy cab when he created the people, but he saw the people lonely and hungry, and he created a companion for these people, and he called this companion capitalism, who begat racism, who begat exploitation, who begat male chauvinism, who begat imperialism, who begat colonialism, and it goes on. So I think, this is just my humble opinion, but I think this is a really clever and very radical poem, and I think it's great. You don't have to go, if you don't like it, that's okay. We'll talk about this later. And then I just wanted to point to the end, because it actually ends on a positive note where we're told that God told the people to be cool. And that may be sort of like a blow off, like, oh, just calm down. But we're told, and the people were cool, and the people kept cool, and the people are cool, and the people stay cool. And God said, Maya, which means like go. And I know that for sure because my if you look it up, there are many different translations. But anyway, so so the silver lining of this is that even though the ghettos and the slums were deliberately created by man in an attempt to kill off an undesirable population, the people are cool, and the people stay cool, and the people will be cool. Pinero also has a play called "The Sun Only Shines for the Cool," so that's definitely a recurring term or concept for him. Really quickly, seeking the cause. I think if you listen to it, or if, well, first of all, the video of Pinero reciting it, that's the real Pinero. And I think you definitely hear that he sounds like a spoken word artist. His poems are very much to be performed. There's a rhythm to them. There's a lot of repetition in them. So that's why I wanted you to see that, because he's definitely a performance artist. But seeking the cause is, I think it's about him. It's about somebody who looks everywhere else but himself or herself. And the problem is ultimately within. But the person never realizes that and dies before they can look to themselves to make things better. So that's seeking the cause, and that is it for Pinero. Curious to know what you think of him. I was very tempted to assign Short Eyes, but this is a spoken word class, not a playwriting class. So I didn't want you guys to get mad or think, why are we reading that? So one last thing that I would like you to do, I'd like you to, now this isn't officially poem number 1, this is just a writing activity to get you to write something. So this poem is going to be either a social issue, a political poem, or a poem to or about a celebrity. So why? Well, these are all types of poems that tend to score well in poetry slams if they're well written and well performed. Political poems and poems about social issues, especially, again, if well done, tend to do very well. The best political poems and social issue poems tend to be when the poet has some type of a personal identification with the issue. So I would, and there are creative ways of writing about an issue without, like, I have a poem that was called Barbie Girl, and it was called that because I used to have blonde hair when I was doing the spoken word thing. And when I first started going to the Nuyorican or any place pretty much, people would treat me like I was just like, they would call me either Paris or Brittany or like whatever blonde white celebrity was hot at the time. They would call me that, like, oh, Paris is coming to the stage. And I felt that I definitely was not taken seriously at all. Like, I had to work very, very hard to be taken seriously. So I wrote this poem, and it's about the sexism and like the way women, especially women who maybe look a certain way or dress a certain way, are perceived as not being intelligent. So it's called Barbie Girl, and it starts out sounding like it's describing a Barbie, but then it twists it around and like has the Barbie climbing out of the Malibu beach house and breaking the windows because she doesn't want to be in there. And so it's so you can, my point is, you can like attack sexism, for example, like I did, in a very in a creative or roundabout way. So you can pick a social issue or a political issue, or if you wanted to pick a celebrity, for example, you maybe could write a letter to Kylie Jenner. Again, if you wanted to maybe address like body image, or you could write a letter to Elvis Presley. I don't know what. The point is, be creative. So picking one of those 3, you're either writing to or about a celebrity, you're doing a political issue or a social issue. And then just something else I'm going to add is that you should really write about what you know, because that's going to be more authentic and the audience will be able to tell. Every poem I've ever written has been true about personal experience. And, sometimes it may feel a little bit like you're making yourself vulnerable, or it might be a little bit embarrassing, but I think it's worth it. The risk is worth the reward. Also, the benefit of writing about what you know means that you have more detail at your disposal because you're familiar with whatever it is you're writing about. So you can use better language, you can use more specific language, more detailed language, more concrete language, and that is the type of language that leads to good poems. So on the assignment sheet, just some examples of general language. You could say, I have a car. That's very general and boring. Or you could say, I have a 2018 Acura. That gives your listener a picture. An abstract expression would be dream of happiness. What does that mean? That's not going to hold your audience. A concrete expression could be under a palm tree in the grill. So if I say to you under a palm tree in a grill, that's like very concrete and specific. If I just say dreaming of happiness, again, what does that mean? And then use precise language. For example, you could say run, but a more precise, more accurate way to say that would be sprint. So try to use specific language, concrete language, precise language, and then don't include like really fancy, complicated allusions or obscure references or like obtuse language that isn't really used because you will lose your audience. So those are just some tips. That's on the assignment sheet. It's in course information. It says writing activity number 1. So in whatever time you have after you finish reading the Miguel Algarin poem HIV, and after you've thought about the discussion question, which is whose style do you prefer, Piñero's or Algarin's, I'd like you to start writing a poem. You don't have to finish it. This is not going to be due. It's just to get you writing. Okay, so thank you for watching. I will see you at 5.